The late afternoon sun had already surrendered to the encroaching winter darkness when Victoria Romano's black Mercedes pulled up to the curb outside Paradiso. The restaurant's name was written in elegant gold script across frosted windows that glowed warmly against the gray December cold. New York City in winter was unforgiving. The wind cut through the Manhattan streets like a blade, sending pedestrians hurrying past with their collars turned up and their heads bowed. Ice had formed in the corners of storefront windows, and the sky hung heavy with the promise of snow that hadn't yet decided to fall. Victoria stepped out of the vehicle, her Valentino coat swirling around her ankles as her heels clicked against the frozen pavement. At 38, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that made people step aside without being asked. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they surveyed. "Ms. Romano," the doorman nodded, pulling open the heavy wooden door. A wave of warmth and the scent of garlic, wine, and fresh bread rolled out into the cold. She didn't acknowledge him. She never did. Inside, Paradiso was exactly what it appeared to be. An upscale Italian restaurant that had been serving Manhattan's elite for 30 years. White tablecloths, crystal stemware, soft jazz playing just loud enough to provide privacy to whispered conversations. The kind of place where deals were made over osso buco and Barolo, where handshakes meant more than contracts. What wasn't immediately apparent was that Paradiso was also Victoria Romano's kingdom, or at least one of many rooms in it. The maitre d' Paolo, a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and impeccable posture, materialized at her elbow. "Ms. Romano, your table is ready. The others arrived 10 minutes ago." "Good." She removed her gloves one finger at a time, her movements precise. "Make sure we're not disturbed." "Of course." She followed him through the main dining room, aware of how conversations dimmed as she passed. Some diners knew exactly who she was. Others only sensed that she was someone important, someone dangerous to look at too directly or for too long. The private room at the back of Paradiso was smaller than the main dining area, with dark wood paneling and a single table set for 6. 4 men were already seated, their conversations dying immediately when Victoria entered. These were her lieutenants, her most trusted advisors, in an organization that controlled everything from shipping contracts to union elections across 3 states. Men who had proven their loyalty over years, sometimes decades. Men who understood that the price of betrayal was something they'd never want to pay. "Gentlemen," Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. She didn't smile. She rarely did in these situations. "Shall we begin? Business discussion, 2:30, 5:45. Marco Valentini spoke first. He was Victoria's second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw, a reminder of past conflicts he never discussed. "The shipment from Baltimore cleared customs yesterday. No problems. The harbor master sends his regards." "And his invoice, I assume," Victoria replied, her voice carrying the faintest note of amusement. "Already settled. He's a reasonable man. Reasonable men who stay bought are invaluable." Victoria turned to the next man. "Anthony, what about the union situation?" Anthony Russo, older than the others, with gray at his temples and glasses perched on his nose, shuffled through papers in front of him. He'd been her father's accountant before becoming hers. "The dock workers' representative has agreed to our terms. The strike won't happen. We guaranteed health benefits and a modest increase, 4% over 2 years. In exchange, they'll approve the new automation protocols." "Everyone wins," Victoria said, "except our competitors who'll be stuck with work stoppages." "That's the beauty of it, Ms. Romano." The discussion continued. Contracts, territory, problems that needed solving, opportunities that needed seizing. This was Victoria's world, a complex network of legitimate businesses and less legitimate interests, all bound together by loyalty, fear, and mutual benefit. She'd inherited this empire from her father 7 years ago and had doubled its reach. Where he'd ruled through intimidation and impulse, she ruled through strategy and calculation. She was, her rivals grudgingly admitted, even more effective than Giovanni Romano had been, and considerably more frightening because they could never quite predict her next move. The conversation had turned to a problem in New Jersey when Victoria noticed something that made her pause mid-sentence. Movement. Just at the edge of her peripheral vision, in the far corner of the private room where heavy curtains concealed a window overlooking a side alley, there was a table there, small and rarely used, draped with a white cloth that reached nearly to the floor, and the tablecloth had just shifted. The discovery, 5:45 to 12. "Ms. Romano?" Marco had noticed her attention drift. "Everything all right?" Victoria raised one hand slightly, a gesture that immediately silenced all conversation. 4 pairs of eyes followed her gaze to the corner, but saw nothing unusual. She stood slowly, her chair sliding back without a sound on the thick carpet. The room's atmosphere changed instantly. Her men tensed, hands moving toward pockets and jacket interiors with the automatic readiness of people who'd survived by being prepared for anything. "Stay," Victoria ordered quietly. She moved toward the corner table with measured steps, her heels muffled by the carpet now. As she approached, she heard it, barely audible beneath the muted jazz from the restaurant's speakers and the hum of conversation from the main dining room. Breathing. Small, rapid, terrified breathing. Victoria crouched down in one fluid movement, her coat pooling around her. She lifted the edge of the white tablecloth. Two enormous brown eyes stared back at her from the shadows. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Victoria Romano, the woman who negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking, who made grown men nervous with a glance, felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Surprise. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He was curled into the smallest ball possible, his thin arms wrapped around his knees, his entire body trembling. His clothes were dirty, not the normal dirt of a child who'd been playing, but the deeper grime of someone who'd been somewhere terrible. His dark hair was matted, and his face was streaked with tears and dust, but it was his arms that made Victoria's breath catch. Even in the dim light under the table, she could see marks. Circular marks like... She forced the thought away, forced herself to maintain her composure. "Hello," she said softly. Her voice, normally so sharp and commanding, came out gentler than she'd intended. "What's your name?" The boy's eyes grew wider, if that was possible. He pressed himself harder against the wall, trying to disappear into shadows that weren't deep enough to hide him. "It's all right," Victoria continued. "No one's going to hurt you here." The words felt strange in her mouth. How long had it been since she'd spoken to a child? Years. Many years. Behind her, she heard Marco's chair scrape. "Boss, you want me to... Stay where you are," Victoria commanded without turning around. Her tone had hardened just enough to ensure immediate compliance. Then, softer again, to the boy. "I'm Victoria. This is my restaurant. Are you hungry?" The boy's eyes flickered, just for an instant, toward the main dining room where the scent of food was stronger. That tiny moment of longing told Victoria everything she needed to know about how long it had been since he'd eaten. "I'll take that as a yes," she said. "If you come out, I can get you something. Pasta? Do you like pasta?" For a long moment, the boy didn't move. Victoria waited. Patience wasn't her strongest virtue in business, but somehow, with this frightened child, she found herself willing to wait as long as necessary. Finally, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, the boy whispered, "Please don't get hurt again." Victoria froze. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she was only beginning to understand. Not "don't hurt me," not "I'm scared," "don't get hurt again," as if he'd seen too much hurt already, as if he was begging not to witness more suffering, as if his small world had already contained more pain than any child should ever know. Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation so unfamiliar she almost didn't recognize it. It took her a moment to identify it as what it was: protectiveness. "No one's going to get hurt," she said, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "I promise. Come out, please." Another eternal moment. Then, slowly, the boy began to unfold himself. He crawled out from under the table with the careful movements of someone who'd learned to make himself small, to take up as little space as possible. When he stood, or rather, when he remained crouched but was no longer under the table, Victoria could see him more clearly. He was painfully thin, his clothes several sizes too large and dirty beyond simple neglect. His sneakers had holes in them. His hands, when they briefly emerged from his too long sleeves, were scraped and dirty. And those marks on his arms. "What's your name?" Victoria asked again, keeping her voice level even as her mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. "Ethan," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been crying for a long time. "Ethan, that's a good name." Victoria slowly extended her hand, palm up, non-threatening. "How long have you been hiding under that table?" Since the people left from lunch. I sneaked in when someone opened the door." His words came out in a rush, as if confessing a crime. "I'm sorry, I didn't steal anything, I needed to hide." "Hide from what?" Ethan's eyes darted toward the door, the same nervous glance of someone who expected pursuit. "The bad men." Victoria's jaw tightened. "What bad men, Ethan?" But before the boy could answer, his legs seemed to give out. He swayed, and Victoria moved instinctively, catching him before he could fall. She lifted him, he weighed almost nothing, and carried him to one of the chairs at the meeting table. Her lieutenant stared in shocked silence. In all their years working for Victoria Romano, They'd never seen her touch anyone with gentleness. This woman who negotiated the darkest deals in the city was now carefully settling a frightened child into a leather chair as if he were made of glass. "Marco," Victoria said crisply, back to business even as she kept one hand on Ethan's shoulder to steady him. "Call Paolo. Tell him to bring chicken soup, bread, milk, and—" She glanced at Ethan. "Chocolate cake. Immediately. Boss, should we—" "Now, Marco." He pulled out his phone without another word. Victoria turned to Anthony. "Clear the room, all of you. Wait in the bar area. I'll call when I need you." "Ms. Romano," Anthony began carefully, "is it wise to— Did I ask for your opinion on wisdom?" "No, ma'am." "Then go." They filed out, Marco casting one last concerned glance over his shoulder before closing the door behind them. Victoria pulled another chair close to Ethan's and sat down, positioning herself at his eye level rather than towering over him. The boy watched her with the wariness of someone who'd learned that adults were unpredictable and often dangerous. "Ethan," Victoria said quietly, "I need you to tell me about the bad men. Who are they? Where are they?" "I don't know their names," Ethan whispered. "They came to our apartment 3 days ago. They were looking for Mommy. They were asking her questions and she wouldn't tell them. And they—" His voice broke. "They hurt her. They said they'd keep hurting her until she told them where she hid something." Victoria's hands curled into fists in her lap, but she kept her face neutral. "Where's your mother now?" "They took her. I was hiding in the closet like Mommy taught me. She always made me promise that if bad people came, I'd hide and be quiet no matter what I heard." Tears began sliding down his dirty cheeks. "I was quiet. I was so quiet. But they still took her. How did you get away?" "After they left with Mommy, I ran. I just ran and ran. I didn't know where to go. I'm not allowed to talk to strangers and I couldn't find a police officer and—" He wiped at his face with his sleeve, leaving clean streaks through the dirt. "I was so scared they'd find me too. And you ended up here. I remembered this place. Mommy used to work near here a long time ago. She said if anything ever happened and I needed to find somewhere safe with warm food, I should look for restaurants because they're usually nice to kids." He looked down. "I'm sorry for sneaking in. I just wanted to be warm for a little while." Victoria sat back, processing. A mother who trained her son to hide. Men searching for something. Marks on a child's arms that suggested proximity to situations no child should witness. A woman taken somewhere against her will. This wasn't random. This wasn't some domestic situation that had spilled into the streets. This had the fingerprints of her world all over it. The underworld of debts and betrayals and scores being settled. But whose score? And why did this child end up in her restaurant of all places? Before she could ask more questions, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Victoria called. Paolo entered with a rolling cart, laden with dishes covered by silver domes. He'd been with Paradiso long enough to know not to ask questions when Victoria Romano was handling unusual situations. He simply set out the food on the table. A bowl of steaming chicken soup, fresh bread still warm from the oven, a glass of cold milk, and a generous slice of chocolate cake, and departed with a discreet nod. "Eat," Victoria instructed Ethan. "Slowly. Your stomach's probably empty. Too much too fast will make you sick." The boy looked at the food the way someone dying of thirst might look at water. His hand shook as he reached for the spoon. Victoria watched him eat, her mind working through angles and possibilities. She should call the authorities. That was the logical thing, the thing that would distance her from whatever situation this was. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Ethan ate so carefully, trying not to seem desperate even though he clearly was. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at the door as if those bad men might burst through at any moment. Maybe it was those marks on his arms, and the haunted look in eyes that should have been filled with childhood innocence. Or maybe it was that phrase, still echoing in her mind, "Please don't get hurt again," as if he'd already seen too much suffering, as if he was exhausted by witnessing pain, as if his brief life had already taught him that hurt was inevitable, and the best you could hope for was to minimize it. Victoria knew that feeling. She'd known it intimately once, a long time ago, before she'd built walls so thick that nothing could reach her anymore. "Ethan," she said as the boy finished about half the soup and was nibbling on bread. "Your mother, what's her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Chen." The name triggered something in Victoria's memory. Chen. Sarah Chen. Years ago, 7 or 8 maybe, an accountant, worked for one of her legitimate businesses before she'd disappeared. Victoria's expression didn't change, but internally, pieces were clicking into place. Sarah Chen had been smart, detail-oriented, and had gotten too close to seeing things she shouldn't have seen. There'd been an incident, rival factions clashing over territory. Things had gotten messy. Sarah had been in the wrong place, seen the wrong transaction, maybe even witnessed, and then she'd vanished. Victoria had assumed she'd run, gotten smart, gotten out. The fact that the woman had stayed in the city, hidden in plain sight for 7 years with a child, spoke to either courage or stupidity or desperation. Your mother, Victoria said carefully. Did she ever talk about her work? About people she used to know? Ethan nodded slowly. Sometimes. She said she used to work with numbers. She said she made a mistake once and had to keep us safe from people who might be mad about the mistake. Did she say who those people were? No. She just said they were dangerous, that we had to be invisible. He looked up at Victoria with those enormous eyes. But she talked about you once. Victoria's eyebrows rose fractionally. Me? She didn't say your name, but she said there was a woman who ran a restaurant, who kept promises. She said if something ever happened to her, and if I had absolutely nowhere else to go, I should try to find the restaurant called Paradiso and ask for the lady who keeps her word. He paused. Are you that lady? For a moment, Victoria couldn't speak. Sarah Chen, terrified enough to disappear for 7 years, had still told her son that Victoria Romano could be trusted, that Victoria kept her word. It was one of Victoria's core principles in business. Once she made a promise, she kept it. It was what separated her from thugs and opportunists. Her word was binding, her agreements honored. It was why people made deals with her even when they feared her, because they knew she wouldn't betray the terms. But for Sarah Chen to trust her with her son's safety, after everything, yes, Victoria said finally, I'm that lady. Ethan's small face crumpled with relief so profound it was painful to witness. Then please help Mommy. The bad men said they'd keep hurting her. They said He couldn't finish. New tears streaming down his face. Victoria reached out, something she never did, and placed her hand gently on top of Ethan's small one. I'm going to find your mother, she said. And even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were true. Knew she'd just made a promise that would complicate everything, that would pull her into whatever dangerous situation Sarah Chen had created. But the alternative, walking away from this terrified child, ignoring his mother's desperate faith, was somehow impossible. I'm going to find her, Victoria repeated, and I'm going to keep you safe while I do. That's my promise. Ethan sniffled, wiping at his face. What if the bad men come here? Then they'll discover that this restaurant and everyone in it is protected by someone considerably more dangerous than they are. It should have sounded like arrogance. It should have sounded like empty reassurance. But the certainty in Victoria's voice made it sound like exactly what it was. A statement of fact. Before Ethan could respond, the door burst open. Marco stood there, his face grim, phone still pressed to his ear. Boss, we have a situation. Victoria stood immediately, positioning herself between Marco and Ethan without even thinking about it. What situation? Dmitry Volkov's people. They're asking about a missing kid. 6 years old, Asian, might be in Manhattan. Marco's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Victoria. They're saying anyone who has information and doesn't share it is making an enemy of the Russian syndicate. Victoria's blood went cold. Dmitry Volkov, Russian mob, ruthless, efficient, and completely without mercy. If the Russians were looking for Ethan, if they were the bad men who'd taken Sarah, this wasn't just complicated. This was potentially catastrophic. What else? Victoria demanded. They're searching the area. Word is they're checking restaurants and shops. They'll be here within the hour. Victoria's mind raced. She had choices to make, and she had to make them fast. She could hand Ethan over. It would be the smart play, the safe play. It would avoid conflict with the Russians, avoid questions about why she'd protected a child connected to someone who'd stolen from… Wait, Marco, what exactly are the Russians saying the boy is connected to? Stolen evidence? Files? Something about accounts and money trails that could put half the Eastern Seaboard syndicate leaders behind bars. Marco's expression was grim. They're saying the kid's mother stole documentation before she disappeared years ago. They finally tracked her down, but she won't tell them where she hid it. They think the kid might know. Victoria looked at Ethan, who had shrunk back in his chair, his brief moment of relief shattered by the word Russians. The boy didn't know anything. She could see that clearly. He was 6 years old, terrified, and completely innocent of whatever his mother had done to survive. But the Russians wouldn't care about that. To them, he was leverage, a tool to force Sarah Chen to give up information that could destroy powerful people. People who included, Victoria realized with a sinking feeling, herself. If Sarah Chen had stolen financial records from Victoria's organization during that chaotic period 7 years ago, everyone out, Victoria said suddenly. Marco, Anthony, everyone. I need 5 minutes alone. Boss, we need to decide. I said out, now. They retreated immediately, closing the door with a firm click. Victoria turned back to Ethan, who was shaking again, his brief moment of hope crushed under the weight of adult problems he couldn't possibly understand. "Ethan," she said, crouching down again to his level, "I need you to listen very carefully. Some very dangerous people are looking for you. People who want to use you to hurt your mother. Do you understand?" He nodded, terrified. "I'm not going to let that happen, but I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" Another nod, less certain this time. "Good." Victoria stood, pulling out her phone. She dialed a number she rarely used, a direct line to her most trusted asset, someone who existed in the shadows of her organization and handled the problems that required absolute discretion. "Isabella," she said when the line connected. "I need a safe house activated, the one in Brooklyn, under the Morrison alias. Full security, no questions, no records. I'm bringing someone there within the hour." "Understood," came the clipped response. Isabella Ferrara never asked unnecessary questions. It was one of the many reasons Victoria valued her. "And Isabella, I need everything you can find on Sarah Chen. Former accountant, worked for us 7-8 years ago, disappeared around the time of the Volkov territory conflict. I need to know where she is right now. I'll make some calls. Do it quietly. The Russians are actively searching. I don't want them finding anything before we do." She ended the call and looked down at Ethan, who was watching her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "We're leaving," Victoria said, already moving toward the door. "You're going to stay very close to me. When we go outside, you're going to hold my hand and walk like we're just a woman and her nephew going home for dinner. Can you do that?" "I think so." "Not think? No. Can you do it?" Ethan squared his small shoulders. Despite everything, despite being exhausted and frightened, he nodded firmly. "Yes. Good boy." Victoria opened the door. Her lieutenants were waiting in the bar area, tension evident in their postures. "Marco, your coat. Give it to me." He stripped off his heavy winter coat without question. Victoria wrapped it around Ethan. It swallowed him completely, but it would keep him warm and hidden. "The rest of you, listen carefully. As far as anyone asks, you never saw a child. This room was used for a business meeting, nothing more. If anyone, and I mean anyone, including people you trust, asks about a boy, you know nothing, understood?" A chorus of acknowledgements. "Marco, you're with me. We're leaving through the back. Anthony, you stay here, handle things as normal. If Russians show up asking questions, you cooperate politely. You know nothing about any child. You give them exactly nothing to be suspicious about." "And if they press harder?" Anthony asked. Victoria's smile was cold as the December wind outside. "Then you remind them that this is my establishment and that I don't appreciate threats on my territory. But do it diplomatically. I don't want a war tonight." She didn't add. "Yet." With Ethan bundled in Marco's coat and holding tightly to Victoria's hand, they moved through the restaurant's kitchen, a maze of stainless steel and controlled chaos where the dinner service was just beginning. Chefs looked up briefly, then away. They knew better than to see things they shouldn't. The back door opened onto an alley that smelled of garbage and ice. Victoria's Mercedes was already there, Marco having signaled ahead. The driver, a silent man named Thomas, who'd been with her for a decade, had the back door open before they'd taken 3 steps into the cold. "Brooklyn safe house," Victoria ordered as she and Ethan slid into the back seat. Fast, but not suspicious. Usual counter-surveillance protocols. "Yes, ma'am." As the car pulled away from Paradiso, Victoria allowed herself one moment to look back at her restaurant, glowing warm against the frozen city night. She'd walked into a normal business meeting 90 minutes ago. She was leaving with a terrified child, a promise she couldn't break, and the growing certainty that she'd just set in motion events that would change everything. Ethan was pressed against the car door, still trembling despite the warm coat. In the passing streetlights, Victoria could see his face. So young, so scared, so completely out of place in her world of shadows and calculated violence. "Please don't get hurt again," he'd whispered under that table. Victoria looked out at the Manhattan streets sliding past, at the city she controlled in ways most people would never understand, and felt something she'd spent years training herself not to feel. Doubt. Not about her decision to protect Ethan. That was made, immovable as stone, but doubt about what it would cost. What protecting this boy might demand of her. What old ghosts might be awakened by digging into Sarah Chen's disappearance and the Russians' desperate search for information. Her phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. "Found something. Call me." "Ethan," Victoria said quietly, not taking her eyes off the phone screen. "I need you to be brave a little while longer. Can you do that?" "I'll try," came the small voice from across the dark seat. "That's all any of us can do," Victoria replied, surprised by the gentleness in her own voice. Then she dialed Isabella, and as the call connected, she prepared herself for whatever information would pull her deeper into this dangerous situation. A situation that had started with a child's whisper and was rapidly becoming something much larger. Something that would force Victoria Romano to choose between the empire she'd built and a promise made to a frightened boy who'd hidden under a table and begged for no more hurt. As the Mercedes merged into traffic, disappearing into the maze of New York streets, one thing was absolutely certain. By morning, everything would be different, and there would be no going back. The safe house in Brooklyn was nothing like what Ethan had expected. When Victoria's Mercedes finally stopped after 40 minutes of winding through city streets, doubling back, taking unexpected turns, ensuring no one followed, they pulled up to a modest brownstone on a quiet residential street. Lights glowed in neighboring windows. A cat sat on a nearby stoop. It looked normal. Inside was different. The first floor appeared ordinary enough. Comfortable furniture, a television, family photos on the walls of people Ethan didn't recognize. But Victoria led him directly to the basement stairs, and with each step down, the house revealed its true nature. Steel-reinforced doors, security cameras in every corner, windows that, Ethan would later learn, were bulletproof. A panic room concealed behind a bookshelf. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress disguised as one. "You'll be safe here," Victoria said, guiding Ethan to a small bedroom that had clearly been prepared for situations exactly like this. The bed was made with fresh sheets. There were clothes in the closet. Children's clothes in various sizes. "No one knows about this place except 3 people, and all of them work for me." Ethan stood in the middle of the room, Marco's oversized coat still wrapped around him, looking impossibly small and lost. Victoria felt that unfamiliar tightness in her chest again. When had she become someone who felt moved by a child's vulnerability? She'd spent years building emotional armor specifically to prevent moments like this. "Are you hungry again?" she asked, knowing it was easier to handle practical needs than emotional ones. Ethan shook his head, though his stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. Victoria almost smiled. Almost. "Come on," she said, extending her hand. "Let's find you something to eat while we wait for information about your mother." The kitchen upstairs was well stocked, another sign this safe house was maintained for emergencies. Victoria found herself doing something she hadn't done in over a decade, making a sandwich for a child. Turkey, cheese, lettuce. She cut it into triangles because she vaguely remembered that children preferred it that way. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, watching her with those enormous eyes that seemed to see too much. "You're different from what Mommy said," he offered quietly. Victoria set the plate in front of him. "Different how?" "She said you were scary." "You are scary, but you're also—" He struggled for the word. "Nice. Sometimes." "Don't get used to it," Victoria replied, but there was no harshness in her tone. She pulled out her phone as Ethan began eating. "I need to make some calls. You eat. There's milk in the refrigerator." She moved into the living room, though she positioned herself where she could still see Ethan through the kitchen doorway. Old instincts. Never turn your back on a potential threat. Except this wasn't a threat. This was a 6-year-old boy eating a sandwich. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Isabella. Victoria dialed back immediately. "Talk to me," she said without preamble. Isabella Ferrara's voice was crisp and efficient. At 42, she was Victoria's most valuable asset. A former federal investigator who'd switched sides after discovering that government work paid terribly and asked too many moral questions. Isabella asked none and delivered results. Sarah Chen, age 34. Former CPA, worked for Romano Financial Services from 2016 to early 2018, disappeared February 2018, right after the territorial disputes with the Volkov organization. Isabella's typing was audible in the background. No social media presence, no credit card usage, no employment records since. She went completely off-grid. "Until now," Victoria said grimly. "Until 3 days ago. I've got unconfirmed reports of Russian operatives moving through Chinatown, asking questions. They were looking for a woman and a child matching Sarah and Ethan's descriptions. How did they find her after 7 years? That's the interesting part. They didn't find her. She surfaced. Tried to access a safety deposit box at a bank in Queens using her real name. The bank flagged it because the box was marked in their system as connected to a federal investigation from 2018. That investigation went nowhere, but the flag stayed. Someone monitoring those flags passed the information along." Victoria's jaw tightened. Sarah got desperate. Needed something from that box badly enough to risk exposure. "Looks that way." Security footage shows her at the bank, then shows her being escorted out by 3 men. Not taken forcefully, she walked out with them, but you can see it in her body language. She wasn't going willingly. Where did they take her? Working on that. But Victoria... Isabella paused, which was unusual. She never hesitated. "There's something else. I pulled Sarah's employment records from 2018. She wasn't just any accountant, she was working on the consolidated reports, the ones that showed money movement between all your operations and the legitimate businesses. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Sarah Chen had seen everything, the whole structure, every connection between Victoria's empire and its public-facing mask. During that mess with the Russians, Isabella continued, someone ordered all records secured. There was concern about information getting out during the conflict. Sarah was in the office late one night when… Another pause. When the situation escalated, she witnessed things. Things that, if testified about, could open investigations into multiple organizations. And she ran, Victoria finished, took the documentation with her as insurance. That's my assessment. The Russians want those files. If they expose you, they weaken your organization and potentially eliminate a rival. They're looking for the files, but Sarah won't tell them where they're hidden. Because if she gives them up, she loses her only leverage, her only guarantee of survival. Exactly. As long as she's the only one who knows where the evidence is, she stays alive. They might pressure her, but they won't. Isabella trailed off, clearly searching for appropriate phrasing. Won't eliminate her, Victoria supplied flatly. What about Ethan? Why hunt the boy? Leverage. If they have the child, they can force Sarah's cooperation. Standard operational procedure for this kind of situation. Victoria glanced toward the kitchen. Ethan had finished his sandwich and was drinking milk, leaving a small mustache on his upper lip that he wiped away with his sleeve. So ordinary, so innocent, and now caught in a nightmare because his mother had made the mistake of seeing too much and surviving. Isabella, I need you to find where they're keeping Sarah. Use every resource we have. Call in favors. Spend whatever it costs. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Victoria, are you sure that's wise? This could start a war with the Russians, over a woman who stole from you and a child who isn't your responsibility. Sarah Chen trusted me enough to tell her son to find me if things went wrong. That makes it my responsibility. Victoria's voice was steel. And I don't break my word. Find her, Isabella. I'll do what I can. But Victoria, you should know, Dmitry Volkov is personally overseeing this. He's in New York. Whatever's in those files, it's important enough that he's handling it himself. That was bad news. Dmitry Volkov was the head of Russian operations on the East Coast, a man known for being methodical, patient, and absolutely merciless when crossed. If he was personally involved, this went beyond simple territory disputes or routine evidence collection. This was about survival, about power, about secrets that could topple empires. Keep me updated, Victoria said. Every hour, whether you have new information or not. Understood. Victoria ended the call and stood for a moment thinking. Through the doorway, she could see Ethan's reflection in the darkened window. A small, scared child in an oversized coat, drinking milk at a stranger's table because his whole world had collapsed in 3 days. Please don't get hurt again, he'd whispered. What had this boy already witnessed in his short life? What had he seen that made him so terrified of more pain, more suffering? Victoria moved back into the kitchen. Ethan looked up, reading her face with the unnatural perceptiveness of children who'd learned to gauge adult moods for survival. Did you find Mommy? He asked, hope and fear warring in his voice. Not yet, but I will. Victoria pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, another unusual gesture. She normally stood during conversations, using height as subtle dominance, but with Ethan, she found herself wanting to be less intimidating. I need to ask you some questions. They might be hard, but I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that? I think so. When your mother worked, before you were born and when you were very little, did she ever bring work home? Papers, computers, files? Ethan nodded slowly. Sometimes. She was always working. Even after she stopped having a job, she'd work on her laptop at night after I went to bed. Did she ever talk about what she was working on? No. She said it was boring adult stuff. His face crinkled with thought. But sometimes she seemed scared when she worked, like she was doing something dangerous. Did she ever mention hiding something? Putting something somewhere safe? Ethan's eyes widened slightly. The storage place. Victoria leaned forward. What storage place? I don't know where it is. But twice a month, Mommy would take me on the subway somewhere. We'd ride for a long time, and then we'd go to this building. It was orange. Like construction orange. She'd give a man some money, and he'd let us into a room with lots of little orange doors. A storage facility, Victoria said. Did you see what she kept there? No, she always made me wait in the hallway. She said it was boring paperwork and that I'd be more comfortable outside where I could play on my tablet. He paused. But once, I peeked. There was a box. Just one box. It had writing on it, but I couldn't read all the words. Do you remember any of the words? Ethan's brow furrowed with concentration. It said, Romano, and accounts, and some numbers. Lots of numbers. Romano Financial. Sarah had hidden the evidence in a storage unit and had been paying to maintain it for 7 years. Smart. Off-grid enough that casual searches wouldn't find it, but accessible when needed. Ethan, did your mother ever say why she kept that box? Why it was important? She said, he hesitated, as if sharing a secret was betraying his mother. She said it was our insurance policy, that as long as she had it, we'd be safe, that bad people would leave us alone because she had something they needed. Except it hadn't kept them safe. Somehow the Russians had found them anyway, and now Sarah was being held somewhere, refusing to reveal the location of files that could destroy multiple criminal organizations, including Victoria's own. One more question, Victoria said gently. When the bad men came to your apartment, did you hear them say anything about what they wanted? Anything specific? Ethan's face went pale. His hands started shaking. They were asking Mommy questions about files, about accounts, about you. About me? They said your name, Victoria Romano. They said Mommy had files that could put you in prison forever. They wanted to know where the files were. Tears began sliding down his cheeks. Mommy wouldn't tell them. She kept saying she'd only give the files to people who promised we'd be safe, that she'd only give them to someone she trusted. Victoria felt something crack inside her carefully constructed emotional walls. Sarah Chen, terrified and facing people with dangerous intentions, had refused to betray Victoria's location or give up information that could destroy her organization. Even while being pressured, even while her son was in danger, she'd held out for someone she could trust, and that someone was Victoria herself. Why didn't she give them the files? Ethan asked, his voice breaking. If she'd just given them what they wanted, they wouldn't have taken her. We'd still be together. Because your mother is smart, Victoria said firmly. Those files are the only reason she's still alive. If she gives them up, she has no leverage, no way to negotiate safety for both of you. She's protecting you, Ethan. Everything she's doing is to keep you safe. But I'm not safe, and neither is she. Not yet. But you will be. Victoria stood, a decision crystallizing. I'm going to find your mother, and I'm going to make sure both of you are safe. That's my promise. Why? Ethan looked up at her with those two old eyes. Why do you care? Mommy said you're important. That important people don't help kids like me. The question struck deeper than Victoria expected. Why was she doing this? It would be so much easier to walk away, to let the situation resolve itself, to protect her empire rather than risk everything for a woman who'd stolen from her and a child who wasn't her responsibility. But she couldn't. Maybe it was Sarah's misplaced faith. Maybe it was Ethan's whispered plea. Maybe it was something in herself she'd thought was long dead. Or maybe it was because when she looked at Ethan, scared, alone, caught in a world he didn't understand, she saw echoes of someone she used to be. Before she could answer, her phone rang. Isabella. You told me to call every hour. It hasn't been an hour, but I found something, Isabella said without greeting. I know where they're keeping Sarah Chen. Victoria turned away from Ethan, lowering her voice. Where? Warehouse district in Queens. Old shipping facility near the water. My sources say it's being used as a temporary holding location. They moved her there after the initial questioning didn't work. How solid is this information? 80% confident. The source is reliable, but I can't confirm visual. They could have moved her again. Send me the address. I want surveillance on the location within the hour. Nobody moves. Nobody acts without my direct order. Understood? Victoria, if you're planning what I think you're planning, just get me the information, Isabella. Let me worry about the planning. She ended the call and took a deep breath before turning back to Ethan. The boy was watching her with desperate hope. Was that about Mommy? Yes, we have a location. I'm going to figure out how to get her back. Can I come with you? Absolutely not. Please, I can be quiet. I can hide. I won't be any trouble. Victoria crouched down to his level, placing her hands on his small shoulders. Ethan, listen to me. The people who have your mother are extremely dangerous. Taking you anywhere near them would put you in terrible risk. Your mother would never forgive me, and I would never forgive myself. You need to stay here where it's safe. But what if something bad happens? What if nothing bad is going to happen? Victoria said with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to be brave. Can you do that? Ethan wiped at his tears and nodded. Good. Someone will stay here with you. Her name is Isabella. She works for me, and she's very good at her job. You'll be safe with her. Will you come back? The simple question carried enormous weight. Children who'd experienced loss learned not to trust promises of return. I will come back, Victoria said. And when I do, I'll do everything possible to bring your mother with me. Investigation and bonding, 3:30 to 8. Isabella arrived at the safe house 20 minutes later. She was a striking woman with sharp features, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of eyes that assessed everything instantly. She carried a laptop bag and a presence that suggested she could handle any situation that arose. "This is Ethan," Victoria introduced. "Ethan, this is Isabella. She's going to stay with you while I work." Isabella's expression softened marginally, a microscopic change that most people wouldn't notice. But Victoria caught it. Even Isabella, who'd seen everything in her years of intelligence work, felt something when looking at this frightened child. "Hi, Ethan," Isabella said, her voice gentler than Victoria had ever heard it. "Do you like video games?" Ethan nodded hesitantly. "Good, because I brought a tablet with about 100 games on it. We're going to be best friends." She glanced at Victoria. "Can I speak with you, privately?" They moved into the hallway, while Ethan remained in the living room, already absorbed in the tablet Isabella had produced. "The warehouse is definitely active," Isabella said quietly. "I've got a person on the outside. Security is tight but not impossible. 3 guards visible. Probably more inside. They're expecting trouble, which means they know someone might come for Sarah Chen. Or they're preparing to move her again," Victoria said. "Possibly. Which means if you're going to act, it needs to be soon." Isabella paused. "Are you sure about this, Victoria? This isn't like you. You don't take these kinds of risks for people outside your organization, especially people who stole from you." "She didn't steal. She took insurance." "That's a very generous interpretation." Victoria looked through the doorway at Ethan, who was curled up on the couch, the tablet's glow illuminating his tired face. "That child asked me why I care. Why someone important would help someone like him. What did you tell him?" "I didn't, because I'm still figuring it out myself." Victoria turned back to Isabella. "But I made a promise. I keep my promises. That's who I am. That's what separates me from people like Volkov." Isabella studied her for a long moment. "You know there's probably more to this. More that we don't know yet. Sarah Chen didn't just witness things 7 years ago. She's been alive this long for a reason. She stayed hidden for a reason. Whatever she knows, whatever she has, it's bigger than routine financial records." "I know. And you're still going to risk everything to get her back?" Victoria thought about that whispered plea under the table. About Sarah Chen telling her son to find the woman who kept her word. About Ethan's 2 old eyes and his exhaustion with witnessing pain. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." Isabella nodded slowly. "Then you'll need a team. I can have 5 people here within 2 hours. Former military, current freelancers, people who know how to handle this kind of situation discreetly. Make it 3 people, too many draws attention. And Isabella, no unnecessary risks. We go in, we get Sarah Chen, we get out. Clean and professional." "Understood." Isabella glanced back at Ethan. "What about the boy? If this goes badly, if the Russians trace this back here, they won't. And if somehow they do, you get him out. There's a secondary safe house in Connecticut. Keys are in the kitchen drawer, address on the keychain. You take him there, and you don't come back until I give the all clear. And if you don't give the all clear," Victoria's expression hardened, "then you make sure that boy grows up safe. Use my accounts. Set him up somewhere far from here. New identity, new life. Make sure he never has to be scared again." "Victoria, that's an order, Isabella. If this goes wrong, you save him. Promise me." Isabella's throat moved as she swallowed. "I promise." "Good." Victoria moved back toward the living room. "I need to make some more calls. Keep him occupied." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria coordinated with Marco, pulled together resources, reviewed surveillance images of the warehouse, and planned approach routes. She was back in her element, strategic, focused, calculating odds and variables. But every so often, she'd glance toward the living room where Ethan was teaching Isabella how to play some racing game, his small voice providing instructions with the seriousness of a military commander. And each time, she'd feel that unfamiliar weight in her chest. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan started yawning. Isabella noticed immediately. "Bedtime, little man," she said gently. "Big day tomorrow." "I'm not tired," Ethan protested, even as his eyes drooped. "Come on," Victoria said, surprising both Isabella and herself. "I'll help you get ready for bed." She led Ethan to the small bedroom, found pajamas in the closet that were only slightly too big, and waited outside while he changed. When he called that he was ready, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, looking impossibly small. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" he asked quietly. Victoria should have said no, should have maintained professional distance, should have remembered that she was Victoria Romano, and Victoria Romano didn't tuck children into bed. But instead, she pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, for a little while. Ethan climbed under the covers, pulling them up to his chin. "Thank you for helping Mommy." "I haven't helped her yet." "But you will." I know you will. He paused. Mommy always said that if you promised something, it was like a rule, that you'd never break your word even if it was hard. Your mother is very observant. She's smart. She taught me lots of things. How to read when I was 4, how to stay quiet when we needed to hide, how to memorize important information in case of emergencies. His voice grew softer. She taught me that some people are bad, but some people are good, and that the good ones are worth trusting, even when you're scared. And you trust me? Ethan looked at her with those enormous eyes. Mommy does, so I do too. The simple faith in that statement was almost painful. Victoria had spent decades building a reputation based on fear and respect, not trust. She'd become someone people followed because they had to, not because they wanted to. But this child trusted her because his mother did. Because Sarah Chen, terrified and hiding for 7 years, had still believed that Victoria Romano kept her word. Go to sleep, Ethan, Victoria said quietly. You're safe here. Will you be here when I wake up? She should be honest. She was planning to leave within hours to attempt something dangerous. There was a real possibility she wouldn't be here in the morning, but she couldn't tell him that. I'll make sure someone you trust is here, she said instead. Isabella will take good care of you. Ethan's eyes were already closing. Okay. Good night, Ms. Victoria. Good night, Ethan. She sat there in the dark, listening to his breathing slow and even out, watching this small person, caught up in consequences he hadn't earned, finally find peace in sleep. When she was certain he was deeply asleep, Victoria stood quietly and moved to the doorway. Isabella was waiting in the hall. He's a good kid, Isabella observed. Yes, he is. Victoria pulled the door partially closed, leaving it cracked so they'd hear if Ethan woke. Status. Team is assembled. Marco is coordinating surveillance. We have eyes on the warehouse. No movement in the last hour. Sarah Chen is definitely inside. One of our people heard them talking about the accountant needing food. What's the security layout? Isabella pulled out her tablet showing thermal imaging of the warehouse. 3 guards outside as we observed. Probably 4 inside based on heat signatures. They're keeping Sarah in what looks like an office on the 2nd floor. The good news is there's a loading entrance on the east side that's only watched by 1 person. If we approach from the water side, we can probably get in without being detected. And once we're inside, that's where it gets complicated. The building is old, mostly open space. Nowhere to hide, nowhere to move without being seen once we're in. Isabella zoomed in on the layout. We'd need a distraction. Something to pull attention away from the 2nd floor while a smaller team extracts Sarah. Victoria studied the images, her mind running through scenarios. This was what she was good at. Strategy, planning, seeing angles others missed. What if we don't sneak in? She said slowly. Come again? Volkov expects a rescue attempt. He's prepared for infiltration. But what if instead I request a meeting? Walk in the front door? Isabella stared at her. That's suicide. No, it's negotiation. Volkov is a businessman at heart. Everything with him is about advantage and leverage. Right now, he thinks he has all the leverage. But what if I offer him something he wants more than information from Sarah Chen? What could you possibly offer that's worth more than files that could destroy multiple criminal organizations? Victoria smiled, the cold, calculating smile that made her enemies nervous. Peace, territory, a chance to expand into areas I currently control without triggering a war that would cost both organizations millions and dozens of people. You'd give up territory to save 1 woman? I'd appear to give up territory. What I'd actually be doing is buying time. Once Sarah is safe and we have the files, we renegotiate from a position of strength. Victoria's mind was already working through the angles. But Volkov doesn't need to know that yet. Isabella was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. It could work. It's risky as anything I've ever heard, but it could work. Volkov respects bold moves. Walking in voluntarily and proposing a deal would catch him off guard. Set it up. I want a meeting with Dmitry Volkov tomorrow morning. Tell him I have a proposal regarding Sarah Chen and mutual interests. Tell him I'm willing to discuss terms for her release. And if he refuses? He won't. He's too curious. Men like Volkov always want to know what their enemies are thinking. He'll take the meeting just to see what I'm offering. Isabella nodded. I'll make the calls. But Victoria, if this goes wrong, if he decides to simply hold both you and Sarah, then you follow our contingency plan. You get Ethan out. You make sure he's safe. Victoria glanced back toward the bedroom where the boy slept. No matter what happens to me, that child gets to grow up away from all of this. Promise me again. I promise, Isabella said solemnly. Good. Make the calls. As Isabella stepped away to make the arrangements, Victoria allowed herself one moment of doubt. Was she really about to risk everything? Her organization, her safety, her carefully built empire, for a woman who'd stolen from her and a child she'd just met? The answer, she realized, was yes, because somewhere in the last few hours, this had stopped being about strategy or obligation. It had become personal in a way Victoria hadn't experienced in years. Ethan's whisper kept echoing in her mind. Please don't get hurt again. He'd seen too much pain in his 6 years. He'd lived with fear as a constant companion. He'd learned to hide, to be quiet, to expect the worst from the world around him. Victoria understood that. She'd been that child once, before she'd built armor around herself, before she'd decided that power was the only reliable protection. But what if she was wrong? What if the real strength wasn't in being feared but in being trustworthy? What if keeping her word to a frightened boy mattered more than maintaining her reputation? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Russians confirmed they'll take the meeting. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the warehouse. They'll provide security guarantees if you come alone. Victoria typed back, agreed. I'll be there. She looked up to find Isabella watching her from the doorway, concern evident in her usually neutral expression. Are you sure about this? Isabella asked. Victoria thought about Sarah Chen, beaten and scared, but still refusing to give up information that would destroy the woman she once worked for. She thought about Ethan, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days because he believed Victoria would keep her word. She thought about the woman she used to be, before the world taught her that only power and fear kept you safe. No, Victoria admitted. I'm not sure about any of this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why? Victoria looked toward Ethan's door, then back at Isabella. Because someone needs to prove to that child that not all adults break their promises, that not everyone he trusts will let him down. She paused, then added more quietly, and maybe I need to prove it to myself too. Isabella nodded slowly. Then I guess we prepare for tomorrow. I'll have the team ready as backup, just in case. Just in case, Victoria agreed. But as she stood in that safe house hallway, preparing to walk into a meeting that could go very wrong, Victoria realized something surprising. She wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, she was doing something not because it was strategically sound, or financially beneficial, or politically advantageous. She was doing it because it was right. Because a child had whispered, please don't get hurt again. And Victoria had decided that maybe, just maybe, she could be someone who prevented hurt instead of causing it. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring danger. Tomorrow would force Victoria to confront not just Dmitry Volkov, but also the ghosts of her own past, the choices she'd made, the person she'd become, and the question of whether redemption was possible for someone who'd spent decades building an empire on fear. But tonight, in this Brooklyn safe house, Victoria Romano sat vigil outside a sleeping child's door and made a promise to herself. Whatever happened tomorrow, Ethan and his mother would survive. They would be safe. They would be free. Even if keeping that promise cost Victoria everything she'd built. Because some promises, she was learning, were worth more than empires. Final scene, 8:12 Horyuting. An hour before dawn, Victoria's phone lit up with an incoming video file. Unknown sender. Her stomach dropped even before she opened it. The video was short, 15 seconds. But those 15 seconds changed everything. Sarah Chen was shown on screen, sitting in a metal chair in what looked like the warehouse office. She was exhausted, clearly hadn't slept in days, but her eyes were still defiant. Behind her stood a man Victoria recognized immediately, Dmitry Volkov himself. Volkov's voice was calm, almost pleasant. Ms. Romano, I understand you wish to negotiate. How wonderful. Let me ensure you understand the stakes of our meeting. The camera zoomed closer to Sarah. She was trying to maintain composure, but her hands trembled. This woman has information I need, Volkov continued off-camera. Information about your organization, among others. She's been remarkably stubborn about sharing it. But I'm a patient man, Ms. Romano. I can wait. The question is, can she? Sarah looked directly into the camera. Despite her exhaustion, despite her fear, her voice was steady. Victoria, if you're watching this, don't come. He knows about Ethan. He knows you have him. This is a trap. Take Ethan and run. Don't. The video cut off abruptly. Victoria stared at the blank screen, her blood running cold. Volkov knew she had Ethan, which meant he'd been watching, tracking, gathering intelligence, which meant the safe house might not be safe anymore. She was on her feet instantly, moving to Isabella's temporary command station in the kitchen. We need to move, now. They know we have the boy. Isabella's fingers were already flying across her keyboard, checking security feeds, running protocols. How much time do we have? Maybe none, maybe hours. I'm not taking chances. Victoria was already pulling out her phone, texting Marco with coded instructions to prepare evacuation routes. Get Ethan up. Pack essential items only. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Where are we going? The Connecticut house, and then... Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. And then I'm still going to that meeting. Victoria, you just said it's a trap. Of course it's a trap. But it's also our only chance to get Sarah out alive. Volkov won't eliminate her until he has those files, which means she's still valuable, still negotiable. And Ethan goes to Connecticut with you. You stay there with a security team. If I don't contact you within 12 hours, you follow the contingency plan. New identities, new location. You get him somewhere safe and far away from all of this. Isabella grabbed Victoria's arm, a familiarity she'd normally never attempt. You're going to sacrifice yourself. I'm going to negotiate, Victoria corrected. There's a difference. Volkov is smart enough to know that ending me starts a war he's not prepared for. My organization would retaliate immediately, and he'd lose more than he'd gain. But he also knows I'll risk a lot to protect people under my protection. That child has been under your protection for less than 24 hours. And that's 24 hours too long for me to break my word, Victoria replied firmly. She moved quickly to Ethan's room, opening the door to find him already awake, sitting up in bed. He'd heard the urgency in their voices, sensed danger approaching again. We have to leave? He asked quietly. Yes, right now. Can you get dressed quickly? He was out of bed immediately, moving with the practiced speed of someone who'd evacuated before. Within 2 minutes, he was dressed and holding a small backpack Isabella had packed with essentials. Are the bad men coming? Ethan asked as Victoria led him toward the garage where a different vehicle waited, a nondescript SUV that couldn't be traced to her. They might be, but we're not going to be here when they arrive. Victoria helped him into the back seat, buckling him in with hands that were surprisingly steady, given the adrenaline coursing through her system. As Isabella drove them through pre-dawn Brooklyn, heading toward Connecticut, Ethan was silent in the back seat. Victoria turned to look at him. Are you okay? You're still going to help Mommy? He asked, even though it's dangerous. Yes. Why? Victoria thought about how to explain to a 6-year-old why keeping promises mattered more than safety, why sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks that didn't make strategic sense. Because I told you I would, she said finally, and because your mother trusted me, and because… She paused, surprised by what she was about to say. Because you both deserve someone who doesn't let you down. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, thank you. 2 small words that carried enormous weight. As dawn broke over the highway, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria Romano realized that everything had changed. 24 hours ago, she'd been one of the most feared women in New York, focused solely on maintaining power and control. Now she was racing toward a safe house with a terrified child, preparing to walk into a meeting that was almost certainly a trap, risking everything she'd built for people who'd stolen from her. And somehow, impossibly, it felt like the first right thing she'd done in years. Her phone buzzed with a new message, this time from Dmitry Volkov directly. I look forward to our meeting, Ms. Romano. Come alone, come honest, come prepared to make difficult choices. See you at 10 a.m. DV Victoria looked at the message, then at Ethan's reflection in the window. A small face watching the sunrise, caught between fear and hope. I'm going to bring your mother home, she said quietly, not sure if she was making a promise to Ethan or to herself. Whatever it takes, I'm going to bring her home. Ethan met her eyes in the reflection. I believe you. Those 3 words carried more weight than any business deal Victoria had ever negotiated. They represented something she'd thought she'd lost forever, someone's genuine faith in her goodness. The sun continued rising as they drove toward Connecticut, toward temporary safety, toward a day that would test everything Victoria Romano claimed to be. And in that moment, with dawn breaking and a child's trust resting on her shoulders, Victoria understood something fundamental. This was no longer about strategy or empire or maintaining power. This was about redemption, and she'd face whatever came next to earn it. The Connecticut safe house felt like a prison to Victoria as she prepared for the meeting with Volkov. Ethan watched her from the doorway, silent and worried. You're scared, he observed quietly. Victoria paused, surprised by his perception. Yes, a little. Mommy always said being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you careful. Those words stayed with Victoria as she drove back to New York. The warehouse loomed ahead, gray and threatening against the morning sky. Inside, Dmitry Volkov waited, tall, silver-haired, dangerous. Sarah Chen sat bound in a chair beside him, exhausted but alive. Ms. Romano, Volkov smiled coldly. Shall we negotiate? Release Sarah Chen. I'll give you neutral territory in Queens and a guarantee of non-interference in your operations. And the files she stole? Stay buried. Starting a war benefits neither of us. Volkov studied her for a long moment. You risk much for someone who betrayed you. She didn't betray me. She survived. There's a difference. After tense negotiation, Volkov agreed. Take her. But remember, Ms. Romano, this debt will be called someday. 2 weeks later, Sarah Chen sat in a private hospital room, recovering. Victoria entered quietly, finding Ethan asleep in a chair beside his mother's bed. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything, for keeping him safe, for keeping your word." "You trusted me when you had no reason to," Victoria replied. "That meant something. What happens now?" "I've arranged new identities for you both. A house in Oregon, far from here. Money and a trust for Ethan's future. You'll be safe." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do all this?" Victoria looked at Ethan, peaceful in sleep. "Because he asked me not to let anyone get hurt again. And I realized I was tired of being the person who caused the hurt." Days later, Victoria stood in her penthouse, looking at a drawing Ethan had made. Stick figures holding hands, smiling. She'd kept her promise. For the first time in decades, Victoria Romano smiled genuinely. Power could break you, but sometimes breaking could rebuild you into something better.